Hi, everyone, this is the Encyclopedia Channel. The book we interpret for you in this program is Catch-22, which is a masterpiece of black humor novels. However, when this novel was published in 1961, few people knew about it, and no one regarded it as a masterpiece of black humor novels. At that time, there was no such thing as black humor in the American literary world. It was not until 4 years later that a man named Friedman compiled a collection of novels called black humor that the word began to enter people's field of vision, and then gradually evolved into an important category in contemporary American novels. At this time, Catch-22 was regarded as a masterpiece of black humor novels. So, what exactly does black humor mean? Why is this work considered a masterpiece of black humor novels? What is the content of Catch-22? You, me, him, who will live in this military rule. You can understand after watching this video. The black and black humor refers to a social reality that is scary, funny, and disturbing. In the eyes of many Westerners who have experienced 2 world wars, the real world is like a hideous monster. Horror, bizarre, and weird events are happening every day. Facing such a black reality, what should human beings do? At this time, humor becomes a weapon. It not only refers to the description of funny and ridiculous scenes, but also means a way of writing, that is, the writer uses sarcasm, wit, jokes, and irrational reason against the black reality, magnifies its dark side, deforms and distorts it, and exposes its fragmented and self-contradictory side to the greatest extent. Black humor is not the writer's evasion and compromise of reality, nor is it hopeless pessimism. On the contrary, it is such an attitude, to fight against falsehood and despair, and to use language to respond to the violence of reality. This literary attitude has been vividly displayed in this book, that is, Yossarian wanted to escape, and Yossarian escaped. The huge length of this novel is not based on the plot, but is supported by nagging dialogues, trivial incidents, and characters who suddenly appear and disappear. It can be said that the novel creates a disordered state at the language level through mixed narration and side-by-side details, which is used as a metaphor for the irrational world in which Yossarian lives. The reason why Joseph Heller wrote such a story is directly related to his personal experience. Heller is a late-blooming writer, born in a Jewish family in New York in 1923, joined the U.S. Air Force after graduating from high school at the age of 17, became a bomber, participated in more than 60 flights in North Africa and Italy during World War II task. After World War II ended in 1945, Heller was demobilized, and later received a bachelor's degree in art from New York University and a master's degree from Columbia University. After graduation, he taught at the university, worked as an advertising copywriter, and once joined the media industry. In 1953, Heller began to write the novel Catch-18, which is the predecessor of Catch-22. The material of the novel comes directly from Heller's experience as a bombardier during World War II. He writes in this way because since the end of the 19th century, Westerners have begun to realize the absurdity and irrationality of the world. Their living experience can be described in this way: people are controlled by something invisible and intangible, and life being pushed around at will, but unable to find a way to fight back. Therefore, Western literature in the 20th century has a tendency to try to reveal this kind of human existence experience, or in other words, try to resist this kind of existence state. In the era when Heller was writing, people began to pin their hopes on language and fiction, regarded narrative as reality and history itself, and used language as a metaphor for the real world, hoping to grasp the world again, establish the certainty of existence, and regain clarity that has been lost. After the mid-1960s, Joseph Heller's reputation suddenly rose, and this novel continued to be popular, but the sales volume exceeded 10 million copies in a few years. On the one hand, it was because during this period in the United States, the voices against the Vietnam War gradually increased, and people were delighted to find that there was such a novel, which aptly described the irrationality and meaninglessness of war, so the sales volume of this book was booming. Section climbed. However, the anti-war tendency is far from the full value of the novel. It may have contributed to the commercial success of the novel, but the real reason why this novel can transcend the limitations of the times and be read again and again is its understanding of the living conditions of modern people. It is a profound revelation and a unique metaphor for the relationship between man and the world. Next, we might as well walk into the world of Joseph Heller's novels to see what kind of existence it is. First part. Pianosa Island is a small island in the Mediterranean Sea, near Italy, where Yassarian and his troops are stationed. Yassarian was, or had been, an excellent pilot, and his tact and valor in battle earned him the rank of captain. But now, he just wants to hide in the hospital and enjoy the hospital food, plus iced juice and iced chocolate milk. He was tired of fighting, tired of flying, tired of dying. Right now, Yassarian has only one wish, and that is to retire. If he can't retire, he should try to avoid flying missions. What prompted Yassarian's transformation? Is the once fighting hero now a coward? Things are probably not that simple. The root of all this has to start with the regulations on the number of flying missions and that incredible military regulation. When Yassarian first joined the flight team, there was a rule that any pilot who had completed 25 missions could apply for repatriation. Therefore, one of Yassarian's comrades in arms, Hungry Joe, embraced hope, faced the shadow of death with great courage, and took the lead in completing this target. However, just when he thought he could return home smoothly, the newly appointed commander, Colonel Cathcart, increased the number of missions to 30. After that, each time someone finishes or gets close to finishing, the number increases. By the time Yassarian flew his 48th mission, the minimum had become 55. Although the 27th Air Force Command, to which the flight group belongs, stipulates that pilots who have completed 40 flight missions can return home, but Catch-22 also stipulates that pilots must obey the commander's orders from beginning to end, so as long as Colonel Carter wanted to, and he could escalate the number of missions without limit, but all Yassarian and his comrades could do was obey or die. In this case, numbers become a kind of meaningless existence. No matter how many times you have flown, you have to keep flying until the enemy shells hit you. The numbers in the novel are full of irony. Digital management was originally the most intuitive application and embodiment of rationality, but now it has become a symbol of irrationality and dominates the fate of Yassarian and his comrades in arms. If that was all it was, it did not constitute a basis for Yassarian's avoidance of combat. Although it is a bit cruel to say this, we all know that for soldiers, sacrifice is often unavoidable, and avoiding combat just because of fear is undoubtedly losing the honor of soldiers and deviating from the mission of soldiers. The question is whether your sacrifice was worth it, whether what you gave your life for had value, and that's the crux of Yassarian's avoidance of the fight. Is Yassarian fighting for justice? The answer is obviously no. Perhaps Yassarian, who had just joined the army, had naively thought that he was fighting for justice, but after he completed 48 missions, he saw the world around him clearly and simply divided it into us and us they two parts. We are those comrades in arms who suffer the same fate as him, Hungry Joe who is worried about the increase of flying missions and has nightmares every day, Clevenger who believes that he is fighting for a just cause, and is working hard to exercise self-cultivation in order to survive Dunbar of Kung Fu, Nately who dedicated his enthusiasm to prostitutes, and Mud who died in an air crash when he arrived at the base before he had time to report. And what about them? They were not the Italians and Germans in the field, but Colonel Cathcart and the men behind him who, in Yassarian's words, are the ones who want us to die. Colonel Cathcart was clever, tactful, successful in his career, 36 years old, and heavy on his walk. He was very conceited because he was only 36 years old and had already become the commander of the flying group, and at the same time he was depressed because he was only 36 years old and he was only a colonel. He was also heartbroken that his military rank fell behind. In a word, Colonel Cathcart wanted to be a general. Being a general is the starting point of all his thoughts and the motivation of all his actions. That is to say, the goal of Colonel Cathcart's combat plan is not to win a certain battle and then win the war, but to accumulate political resources, good early promotion. Therefore, he often makes some combat arrangements that are contrary to common sense. For example, when pilots are required to perform bombing missions, the bombs must be concentrated, instead of giving priority to killing the enemy and saving themselves. Because the explosion effect of the concentrated bombing is more obvious, it is convenient for reporters to take pictures and follow up reports. In this way, Custer, as the commander, can be successfully published in the newspaper and win honor and appreciation. And what's the price behind it? Naturally, Yassarian and his comrades lived. Colonel Cathcart's nonsense did not stop there. Once, he heard that Danica, a doctor with the army, had died in battle, so he sent someone to send a death telegram to the doctor's wife. But in fact, the doctor was not on the plane at all, nor did he die in battle. After Colonel Cathcart knew the truth, he refused to admit the fact that the doctor was not killed in battle, and announced publicly that if the doctor dared to appear in public, he would cremate him on the spot. So the doctor became a soldier without military status, could not receive supplies, and had to rely on the support of his comrades to survive. Colonel Cathcart did it with one purpose, to highlight what he called the art of leadership. It was because of these things that Yassarian considered Colonel Cathcart his enemy. In order to become a general, Cathcart did everything he could to compete with other flying groups with his own lives, increasing the number of flights time and time again, driving Yassarian and his comrades to a dead end. He turned black and white, disregarded human life, trampled on human dignity and honor, but wrapped himself in words such as lofty, righteous, and patriotic, kidnapped Yassarian and his comrades morally, and established a rational basis for his actions. This was the insight that Yassarian had traded for dozens of missions, the quintessential picture of their world, and the reason Yassarian went from a fighting hero to a sick patient. On their other side of the world, Colonel Cathcart had trouble with Yassarian too, seeing him as a thorn in his side that would get in the way of his career. From Colonel Cathcart's point of view, honest people like Milo, the catering manager, are worthy of trust. How honest is Milo? First of all, he bribed his superiors, under the pretense of purchasing military supplies, used the resources of the flight brigade, engaged in speculative business, and made a fortune in war. Soon, he changed from a small catering manager to the founder of the Fruit and Vegetable Joint Company, and in return, he made Colonel Cathcart the deputy general manager of the company. This is the life of Candide Milo way. With Colonel Cathcart's protection, Milo's business grew bigger and bigger. He not only did business with Americans, but also with Germans. For him, the longer the war was fought, the more money he made. What does it matter who wins or loses? In order to make money, Milo can say that he will do everything. If justice, morality, and conscience cannot be used to make money, then it is useless at all. What is even more powerful about him is that even if people know how he does it, but there is still nothing he can do about it. He would raise the price of meals in the canteen and search for the income of his comrades, and at the same time, on Thanksgiving, he would prepare sumptuous lunches and cheap whiskey for the entire team, and everyone in the flight team would express their gratitude to him humbly and respectfully. He had flown only 5 missions, but in Colonel Cathcart's opinion he had flown enough, and he was trying to count more. What about the rest? At this time, 70 missions had been carried out, but Cathcart was still struggling with how to get them to fly more times willingly, even if they were not willing, as long as they could fly more times. The second part. There is a huge gap between our world and theirs, and above these two worlds, there is a higher level of existence, that is, Chaplain Tupman and the God he represents. Sadly, for modern people, God has been dead for too long. His servant Tapman in the world is now a mud bodhisattva crossing the river. He cannot protect himself, let alone resolve the spiritual crisis of others and guide others. Captain Tupman was a slim man whose day job as chaplain consisted mainly of reading prayers to pilots before their missions and presiding over their funerals when they were killed. For these two tasks, Tupman gradually felt powerless, not because his sick physique made it difficult for him to support him, but because he encountered a fundamental, thorough, and pure spiritual crisis. He wondered, does God exist? Is there any real faith? Is there a soul after death? Facing these essential problems, Tupman was helpless. In reality, Tupman once explained to Cathcart why Yassarian and others did not want to fly, and persuaded him to cancel the target of 60 missions, but these were not enough to change the fate of Yassarian and his comrades, nor can it help the pastor overcome his spiritual crisis. Joseph Heller sets up such a character as Captain Tupman in the novel, which has obvious symbolic color. In the Western tradition, God is an existence that transcends everything, and is the embodiment of all morality and values, not only guiding people's spirit, but also restricting people's behavior. Therefore, when people lose their faith in God, they are like lost lambs, panicking and not knowing what to do. But in the world of this book, belief can no longer bring people salvation. Instead of giving people spiritual and behavioral guidance, Captain Tupman was reduced to being used by Colonel Cathcart. Those prayers that he found low also had to promise people against his will that God would appear after death. As a result, Tupman's faith collapsed, and he found that people's fate was dominated by other unspeakable forces. God not only failed to bring salvation, but accidentally became an accomplice. For Westerners, no picture could be more black than such a reality. In such a black world where the spiritual level has returned to barbarism and disorder, it is obviously easier for Cathcart and Milo, who have no taboos, to win the so-called success. And those who hold on will inevitably die of what they are trying to hold on to. Among them, the most typical example is Nately. Nately was born in a wealthy family, never experienced ups and downs since he was a child, and has a naive energy that has never been experienced in the world. After joining the flying team, he fell in love with a local prostitute in Italy. In order to stay in the flying team, he offered to increase the number of flights. Even though Yossarian knelt down to beg him, Nately still insisted on flying more times. And in turn begging Yossarian to let Colonel Cathcart fly more. Nately's petition became the gospel of Colonel Cathcart. He was worried that he could not find an excuse to continue to increase the number of minimum missions. In the evening of the same day, the number of flights was increased to 80. At dawn the next day, German warships attacked the port, and Nately went to battle as he wished, and as expected, he lost his life. Among all the pilots, Yossarian seems to be the only one who is sober. He is soberly aware of the cruelty of war and the value that he and his comrades are trying to uphold, whether it is God, justice, or love, in this world. There is no room for survival in the world, and he realized that people are only valuable if they are alive. But he cannot rationally express his clear understanding of reality, because in an irrational and disordered world, logic, rationality, and order are the most useless things. Everything is a paradox, everything is self-contradictory. This is the essence of the Catch-22, and it is also the indescribable force that dominates the fate of people. Catch-22 is a stipulation. Anyone who thinks he is a lunatic can apply not to participate in the flight mission, but the application must be submitted by himself, and once the application is submitted, it means that you can use reason, which means that you're not a lunatic, so he doesn't meet the criteria for applying for grounding. It can be said that this rule is not only the biggest obstacle to Yossarian's retirement, but also the most concise and most accurate metaphor for the fate of modern people. For Yossarian, he was in a situation where, no matter how many missions he flew, he was meeting his targets, not Colonel Cathcart's. As long as he couldn't prove he was crazy, he's going to keep flying, and the only way to prove he's a lunatic is to use reason soberly. There is only one way to break the cycle, and that is death. But death is the end of all values, surrendering to the black reality, bowing to the world of violence, power, and irrationality. So how is Yossarian going to fight? This is a question we are very curious about, because before Yossarian, the protagonists of many literary works tried to fight against such a world. The land surveyor Kay in The Castle and the clerk Massault in The Stranger are either heroic or mediocre, but they all fail without exception. So what will happen to Yossarian? Yossarian discovered that only disorder and madness could fight against disorder and madness itself, so he began to act crazy and do all kinds of things that were against common sense, the most famous of which was getting naked at the military award ceremony. As we have already introduced at the beginning, Yossarian is a combat hero. He successfully completed the task in the Battle of bombing the Ferrara Bridge, so the superior decided to award him a medal. At the award ceremony, Yossarian stood in the queue, wearing only a pair of leather shoes. His reason was that the blood of his dead comrades splashed on his clothes, so he swore never to wear a military uniform again. However, this madness was rationalized by Colonel Cathcart, who, in answer to his superior's questioning, explained that Yossarian had to be naked because his uniform was still being washed with blood. Reality is so dark, and like to give you a little humor from time to time. When you use reason, they return madness, and when you show madness, they use reason to soften you. Even so, facing such an unruly thorn, the military's high-level headaches, in the long run, Yossarian will definitely affect the morale of the army. Simply put, he will prevent them from sending other people to the battlefield. Therefore, when Yossarian deserted to Rome and was captured by the military police, the top military officials tried to make a deal with him, as long as he was willing to cooperate with the military's propaganda and speak for the military on radio, television, and newspapers. The military he was awarded a medal and asked to return home as a hero. If he doesn't accept the deal, he'll be court-martialed for deserting his post. Yossarian agreed without much struggle to the military's offer, transferring himself from our world to their world. But when he walked out of the gate, the Italian prostitute whom his comrade in arms Nately fell in love with disguised as a guard and slashed at him head-on. She blamed Yossarian for Nately's death. In the hospital, Yossarian, who survived the catastrophe, confessed to the pastor the deal between the military and him, and planned to tear up the previous agreement. Finally, with the help of the pastor and others, Yossarian escapes to Sweden successfully, and the novel comes to an end here. Yossarian in the novel seems to escape the mercy of Catch-22, but as long as the world remains disordered, broken, and irrational, no matter where he flees, he cannot be truly free. This inescapable military rule is not only the fate of Yossarian, but also the fate of every modern man. Today, the word Catch-22 has become a fixed concept in English, used to describe a self-contradictory situation and the resulting dilemma. The meaning is similar to paradox, but more metaphorical. In our daily life, we may have all experienced similar situations, such as not being able to find a job because of lack of work experience, and lack of work experience because of not being able to find a job. It can be seen that Catch-22 not only exists in novels, but may also appear in everyone's daily life. The third part. This is roughly the main plot of the novel. Speaking of this, some people must be curious. It seems that a story is not told from beginning to end, In fact, the author's original intention is not to tell a story step by step. The plot of the novel is simple, and the narrative sequence is often reversed. Although Yossarian is the protagonist of the novel, not all events revolve around him. If you compare it with the classic realist novels of the 19th century, this book is very different, with a looser structure and less three-dimensional characters, and the overall narrative is trivial, hybrid, and decentralized. If you finish reading this novel, it is easy to form such an impression that the author is addicted to his own narration, and most of the time he narrates for the sake of narration, and seems to have lost control of the language, allowing it to spread, and finally formed such a work. This is not a special case in the history of literature. Since the middle of the 20th century, more and more writers have tried to break through the traditional novel writing mode in terms of writing. The so-called postmodernist novel generally began to appear during this period. The exploration of form is not only due to the innovation and change at the technical level, but more importantly, the change of the writer's worldview. The reason why traditional realistic novels can focus on characters or plots is to establish a stable and well-ordered value system above. In today's era, fiction, as a metaphor for the real world, has naturally become fragmented and full of uncertainty. Therefore, this novel looks very special in form at first glance, but it is very universal when viewed from the perspective of the entire literary history. After talking about the uniqueness and universality in the form of the novel, let's talk about the uniqueness and universality of the character Yossarian. The most intuitive manifestation of Yossarian's uniqueness is his will to survive, putting survival first, and regarding living as the source of morality and value, which is rarely seen in previous novel characters. The reality of Yossarian's existence is black. It is his greatest misfortune that he cannot sacrifice for the country, justice, love, and other values. Humorous approach to reality confrontation. Humor at this time means pretending to be crazy, being incoherent, paradox, banter, sarcasm, and unconventional. However, we cannot ignore one thing: no matter how crazy Yossarian's behavior is, it is the result of his use of reason, a rational behavior wrapped in irrationality, which makes him different from the characters in existential novels and absurd dramas. The protagonists share the same spiritual vision, resisting despair and emptiness, not bowing to nothingness, and sticking to the value of existence even if God is dead, even if this value has been reduced to resistance itself. Now, let's recap the main points in this issue. 1. Catch-22 is considered to be the representative work of black humor novels. The word black humor comes from a collection of novels. After the mid-1960s, it was gradually accepted by people and developed into a contemporary American and important genre in fiction. 2. Black humor novels refer to novels that express the darkness and distortion of reality and society with comic techniques such as jokes and sarcasm. The protagonists of this type of novel are different from the heroes in previous novels. They are often powerless to fight against the black reality and can only accept it, and finally they are overwhelmed by fate. 3. Catch-22 is mainly composed of two parts. One is that soldiers must obey the orders of the commander, and the other is that lunatics can apply for grounding, but making an application means that they can use reason, so it does not meet the application criteria. Today, the word has become a fixed concept in English, meaning a kind of dilemma that cannot be escaped. 4. Catch-22 tries to break through the model of classic novels in the 19th century at the formal level, and writes in a trivial, hybrid, and decentralized way, which provides inspiration for later more radical postmodernist literary experiments. 5. Yossarian confronts the disorder and meaninglessness of reality with rationality wrapped in irrationality, regards survival as the source of morality and value, and regards resistance itself as the meaning of existence, which is similar in spirit to existential novels and absurdism. The characters in the play have a secret inheritance relationship. This is the end of this episode of the show. What do you think about it differently? Welcome to leave a message to discuss with everyone. Hey, if you like our channel, please subscribe us. Haha, remember to like it.